Hi. So, as people are joining, I would like to welcome all of you. This is our latest episode of All Tech is Humans webinar series, where we engage in conversations with responsible tech leaders to discuss some of the world's thorniest tech and society issues. We're really glad you're here with us for this important conversation. Please say hello to each other in the chat, share a little about yourself, tell us where you're tuning in from. I'm your host today. I'm Rebekah Tweed, the Executive Director at All Tech is Human. We are a nonprofit that brings together the global responsible tech community, and you can find out how to get involved with our work at alltechishuman.org. You'll see all of our different activities across our three work streams. We have multi-stakeholder collaboration and community building, multidisciplinary education and resource development, and responsible tech careers. So we have a stacked panel for today's conversation. We are sharing reflections from our recent AI Assurance Ecosystem workshop that we held last month in London, that All Tech is Human was honored to co-host in partnership with Tech UK and Trilligent. So from Trilligent, today we have our workshop co-host, Associate Director, Iana Pervazova. Our incredible co-host from Tech UK, Tess Buckley, is unfortunately not able to join us today, but she did help secure this powerhouse panel of experts who did participate in the workshop with us and are here today to share their perspectives and to give some of their major takeaways from the gathering. So we have Aditi Udayabhaskar, Regulatory Compliance Advisor for Online Safety. We have Annabel Gillard, the co-founder of Conversations on AI. From Digital Catapult, we have Chanell Daniels, Responsible Technology Innovation Manager. And we have Uthman Ali, Associate Fellow at the University of Oxford Saïd Business School. So thank you all on incredibly short notice for being here today. We're going to jump right in, and thanks to everyone for joining us. I want you to please be sure you check out the speakers' full bios on the Zoom registration page and in our follow-up materials. So just to give a little quick context setting, so last month we convened about 60 influential voices from all across the responsible AI and AI assurance ecosystem. We discussed under Chatham House rule how to effectively communicate assurance priorities across different audiences, how to equip each other with concrete steps for amplifying assurance initiatives, how to create compelling narratives for stakeholder buy-in and internal buy-in, and how to build the persistence needed to advance these responsible AI practices despite shifting attention cycles and a lot of political headwinds around the world. So during the workshop, we had deep dive breakout sessions, and we focused on two main questions. One, what is driving the AI assurance ecosystem? And two, how do we maintain momentum? So participants shared their experiences with AI assurance practices, compared perspectives on effective strategies, and we have released a summary report that details all of the main takeaways and recommendations. So I do encourage everyone to download that at alltechishuman.org. We'll also include that in our follow-up materials to anyone who registered for this webinar. So the core components of AI assurance, for anyone who maybe is less familiar, that includes things like regulatory requirements, standards and norms, assessments against frameworks like NIST's AI risk management framework, practices like testing, evaluation, verification and validation, certification and accreditation, audit and corporate governance, and also efforts like AI literacy and workforce enablement. So with that context set, that's really all the talking I plan on doing. So we're going to turn things over to our panelists now. And for the structure of this conversation, I'm just going to go around the panel in alphabetical order. So we'll go Aditi, Annabel, Chanell, Iana, and Uthman. So the first question, what was one theme that emerged from the workshop, and especially from your particular breakout sessions, that stood out the most to you? And Aditi, we're going to start with you.
The joys of having a name that starts with A. No, Annabelle and I were actually on the same sort of breakout session and table. So a lot of what I think we might say might be sort of similar in that regard. But I think the biggest takeaway in terms of just the discussions on the day was how many different, and apologies, I'm in London, there's a lot of police sirens in the background. I think how many different versions or interpretations of AI we even had before we could come to the assurance piece. I think some people were looking at it from the traditional, okay, we've got a chat GPT sort of chatbot, and then that's like the general understanding. But then we also got into cases of, okay, if you have like a feed and then the algorithms are like, influencing what comes up on it, how much of that should be under the scope of AI? Or in a video gaming context, a lot of the games are created with AI. Should we be thinking about that? So I think for me, that was one of the more surprising takeaways. And we had a very diverse sort of table. So it was a lot of perspective, but also we had regulators, we had practitioners, we had, civil society. So it was a really interesting sort of debate from the get-go. So for me, I think that was the one thing that really stood out as a big sort of, wow, okay, we need to start at bare, like basics of what is AI and the foundational blocks of that. But yeah, I'll stop there. Annabelle?
Thanks, Aditi. Annabel.
Thank you. Yeah, we did. We had a really mixed group. It's actually one of the things I love about any conversation to do with AI is just how many perspectives are relevant. And anytime you try and open it up, it's even more of a kaleidoscope than you thought, even when you think you're starting to get a handle on it. And so, but also what came across to me very clearly was the need for assurance. And I'm going to be a bit controversial here because I know we're always in a hurry and conscious of the speed, but I do think we've made progress as well. I do think you look at how far we've come in the last year or two, and there is a lot of movement. Yes, there's an awful lot still to go, but I think we have come some way to understanding it. I think that most of us recognize that a lot of the worlds that we're working in, there isn't quite enough understanding yet, but we're on that journey. And certainly, I think one of the other things that came through was the need for kind of clarity on terms and taxonomy, and the more we can get clear on those definitions, and that's really kind of just echoing what Aditi said, the more we can get clear on that stuff, the easier it will be to actually try and pass some of this complexity and find a way through. So yeah, but it's super interesting.
Thanks, Annabelle. Chanell.
Yeah, I think for me, I suppose it's probably less about those technical aspects, but something that really did stand out for me and that I do feel a level of concern and comfort about was actually how similar our challenges were across, like especially with the people that are actually working within companies or advising companies on like areas of AI assurance. Like our challenges were all so similar in ways that did surprise me, which was like a concern in a lot of ways. But and then also, I think probably from a more personal perspective, it actually gave me a sense of how big the problems are that I'm trying to address, like, kind of what it means for actually being able to advocate for certain things in the organization, et cetera, et cetera. Like how big those challenges are. So in some ways, it's almost like a level of self-forgiveness, I suppose, with knowing that I'm still facing challenges with something that I've been trying to work on for over a year, for example. So yeah, I think in that respect, that was quite a significant takeaway from the areas that we discussed.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Iana.
Yeah, thank you. Chanell, I really identify with what you were saying. I think we had a lot of yes and kind of moments around the table, which was really nice. I think the flip side of that is that, so often in these groups or in these, even in the room, we are people who work on these topics every day. So I think something that really stood out to me was just a reminder of the public distrust or even fear around AI. I know that we talk about that in one way in this circle, but it's different when it comes to, outside of, stakeholder groups or very technical, experts. So I think what stood out to me was really the need to communicate in more nuanced and thoughtful ways, I think now more than ever, with that, plummeting reputation of AI. I don't know if you can even call it plummeting. I don't know how high it was to begin with among some, parts of the general public. But I think just in combination with that and the lack of clarity around what the kind of general current state of play is on, for example, AI regulation, I just think that, communication, specifically going beyond fear-mongering headlines and going into kind of content-specific things was one of my big takeaways.
Thanks. Uthman?
For my table, I think the main takeaway was that this job's incredibly rewarding, but also super difficult because you're talking about a whole scale organizational change that impacts so many people. So you really do need to have a cohesive plan and break it down into manageable chunks. So at least that you're making progress in the areas that you can make progress quickly. So you don't kind of get frustrated and feel like you're kind of stuck on certain parts, right? But the other thing we brought up was the need for credible AI experts and competence in areas, particularly around ethical AI, where standards are still developing. And it does at times feel like you're shooting in the dark, but the importance of basically being proactive. And when AI assurance, or even the word assurance is often connotations regulatory driven, it can take quite a long time for for policymakers to basically release standardized guidance. And you don't want to be sitting on your hands. You need to be active now to even be in a defensible position and put stuff into production that's actually high quality.
That's a great segue into our next question. We did talk quite a bit about making the business case for AI assurance. So I'm curious, what were some of the points that were most compelling to you? And we'll start again with Aditi.
I think for me, one of the bigger points with AI assurance was, funnily enough, I think when you think about investment in like companies across the board, we're now moving into a phase where companies are particularly being sort of analyzed and rigorously sort of deconstructed in terms of how ethical their, operations are, even the product. So I think whereas earlier you might have gotten away with not having thought through things from an assurance standpoint, now I think especially with the lessons learned from, other industries where it wasn't done so quickly, we're now actually moving to a place where with AI assurance, investors are starting to ask the questions, especially at the basic seed funding stages where, okay, have you done your AI assurance? What does that look like? Have you thought through things? Why should we invest in you? And I think also there's the piece of, once a company has then scaled up, investors don't want to have to take you on that journey, themselves. They're looking for that to be coming from the businesses themselves. So that's, I think, one of the bigger takeaways here for the business case. Also, from a compliance perspective, it would be remiss of me to not mention, as a regulatory compliance focus, where we draw the lines with sectoral obligations and then pre-existing regulation that already exists, say, in the privacy space, the online safety space, or the cybersecurity space. And how does that look from an AI perspective now? Because the way I see it is it's all encompassing across multiple sectors, but then you already have regulation in those sectors too. So, for someone like me, how do I interpret this change? And then the business case there, I think, also helps the company go through, or the business go through all these audits, have these in place, also to just sort of understand what their, business ecosystem looks like and where they need to invest. So I think it's like it goes both ways, but those for me were the two main things about why we actually generally need AI assurance above all.
That's great. Annabel.
Yeah, for me, it comes down to trust, trust building with each other, trust building with the public. I know this is specifically about regulation, but it's one of the things that does my head in slightly about the regulation or innovation debate. It's not either or. It's do regulation well, you get really good innovation too. We're not all going to, I don't know, take a new medicine unless somebody's tested it. We're not going to get on a plane unless we know that it's passed, or in a car unless we know it adheres to certain standards of safety. So it's really a nonsensical argument, and I think it feeds the distrust that you have in the public. And actually, if we can establish some measures of trust and actually, demonstrate that we're proactively seeking to be responsible with this technology, then I think that's only a good thing, to be honest. And from a business point of view, it enables scalability. The clearer and sooner we can reach that kind of platform of what does good look like and who do we feel confident is proactively choosing to sign up for that, then away we go, I think. So for me, it's down to trust.
Chanell.
Yeah, well, something I've actually been thinking about quite a bit since some of the discussions I had in the workshop, and as well the side discussions, especially with people that work in completely different industries than what I'm used to, is how, like, on the one hand, there is this very key, need, and with grounded rationale of making sure that there's a level of consistency with language. But on the other hand, when talking to concerns, especially across different sectors, I'm becoming very aware of how different aspects of AI assurance and different ways of being able to articulate the impacts of AI assurance actually has a different level of kind of emotional resonance with the people that we're talking to. So, for example, like, working with organizations that might be focused on logistics and supply chain, like if I'm able to ground things into things that relate to, for example, accuracy and things like this, like that has a much bigger impact there than, say, for example, organizations in the creative sector, where actually talking about things that relate to inclusivity and fairness actually resonates a lot more, even if I'm talking about the kind of same AI assurance process that will get us to that point. And I think, I find that's something that's been on my mind quite a bit. And I think, more recently with going into a project that I'll be working on for a while that relates to the agricultural sector, and actually just being able to listen. I'm listening differently to how the different organizations are talking about what they need and what they're able, how solution providers are able to deliver. And, even they're noticing like how significant it is when they're thinking about what trust means to be able to encourage more small scale farmers to be able to use a solution and ensure that there's that network. Actually, it's almost like a completely different language around that. But actually, what they need, it still comes down to the same kind of core of what AI assurance is. But actually, if I'm using language that might be more aligned to kind of policy and standards, it's quite distant for them. So it actually they just wouldn't be engaged in the same way. So anyway, that's just something that's been on my mind since the session.
Thanks. Iana.
Yeah, I think building on a lot of what was already said, I see AI assurance as business case in, I guess, two ways. So first, really as a way and a process to gather detailed and meaningful information that otherwise companies wouldn't necessarily have. And not to, bring in a cliche, but, information is power, I think, in a lot of ways, not just for business decisions, but also for communications and policy engagement decisions or strategies as well. And then second to that is really having that running start, which I think Uthman, you were kind of referencing to, having that running start when regulation does inevitably come through, as it already is in some markets. So I think kind of the flip side of Chanell, what you were saying with the different communication strategies for the different audiences, I think when we're thinking on a policy level right now, the landscapes are so extremely fragmented. And so what one company is sometimes communicating, especially in policy circles, can be in some markets, for example, in the US, completely almost contradictory to what they might be communicating, especially maybe behind closed doors and in certain, conversations, to what they're communicating in the EU, just because of the positions of the two markets being so incredibly distinct. And so I think, though, in the longer term, I see AI assurance just as a way of understanding and communicating how an AI system, works. And that's just something that can be applied in so many instances in any market, no matter the kind of political regulatory positioning.
And Uthman, what stood out to you?
You don't really want to be wasting anyone's time or money. So when it comes to assurance for companies, like you could have all the great ideas in the world, but if they're all listed as like high risk under the AI Act, and you don't have a well-resourced legal team, like let's say you're not a FTSE 100 company with an in-house data science team or in-house AI legal counsel, who's going to be filling out conformity assessments or actually meeting these requirements? So unless you think about these things up front, you're just going to have a load of great ideas that could potentially be scaled, but as a company, you haven't invested in these very key areas. So again, it's about having a cohesive plan and strategy and knowing that even if you don't have the resources to manage that risk, there are plenty of really good AI ideas that might be lower risk that you could do, that if you group them together and scale them, could potentially have the same profitability as a few really high risk, high value ones. So it just should be part of an overall AI strategy.
Great point. Okay, so we also spent quite a bit of time discussing effective narratives and different communication strategies. So I'm curious, from each of your perspectives, what strategies or frameworks did you find most effective for actually translating those assurance outcomes into trust building narratives, especially for non-technical audiences. So yeah, Aditi, we'll start with you.
I think coming back to that piece on trust building narrative specifically, one thing that our table definitely discussed a lot was how do we get the public involved? I know we say this a lot, and then there's a lot of like, oh, was the public actually involved? Point taken. But I think this time around, the fact that AI has become such a household conversation, really. I think previously what used to happen is, let's say it's privacy. People have to have a specialist awareness of what the topic is, GDPR, whatever it might be. And then they, you have to first of all educate them on that and then bring them in. I think with AI, the one advantage, even though it's slightly concerning, is it's embedded into pretty much everything we do every day. So everyone has an opinion. So that's at least a good starting point. Now the question is, how do we bring them in? So I think in terms of frameworks, I think more consultations with the public, and coming back to Iana's point, there is the added challenge of, it's so fragmented, geopolitically, even there's other narratives that play into this. But I think that's the best way, at least now, because to Annabelle's point, we're just moving at such a, crazy rate of progress. Every month there's something new. The longer we leave it, potentially the worse the problem gets. So I think getting the public in and doing that in a way that is actually convincing enough, where people feel empowered to share their opinion and not think, oh, actually, I don't know enough, so I'm not going to say anything. I think that doesn't help. So that would be, I think that's what I took away from that day particularly.
That's great. Annabel.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is. Thank you, Aditi, for those comments, because I think 100% we spend a lot of time talking about mechanisms for how you have those kind of conversations, and the conversations on AI, which is the tech network that I run. That's exactly what we're trying to do: create these spaces where and actually it's what all tech is human is trying to do as well, create these spaces. But I suppose what we're all doing is talking to people already interested in AI. How do we actually extend that engagement and create mechanisms by which we can engage the general public? And I think the example of Audrey Tang in Taiwan is a really instructive example that perhaps we can all think about how we can better manage that. We did also talk a little bit about the narrative within organisations and the benefits or not of linking it to ROI or any kind of way of kind of showing a financial benefit to get companies interested. And then the only other thing, the other note I've got is we also talked about some of the wording shifts that are happening already around, say, from safety to security and from ethics to responsibility, and how we've seen some kind of shifting of the narrative in the last, 6 to 9 months. So it's, yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Chanell.
Yeah, so something that I think about this in two different ways. So with the first way I'm thinking about this is in terms of what it means to be, like within organizations where more action is actually needed. And I think that in terms of thinking about what has been especially effective kind of strategies and frameworks there, I think like standards like 42001, for example, that actually like thinks about what it means to have that kind of like executive driven approach to managing risk, I think, and actually having more kind of senior leaders actually take on the responsibility of managing risk. I think that I think a lot of times I see within where I work and in different companies, like sometimes that can actually help to change a whole set of thinking about like what risk management means in an organization around, and like also like what is the like how the benefits of AI assurance can be felt across an organization. Like this is not just about benefits that benefit like one particular team that's but actually I think when you think about it from that top down level, like it's something that is really felt like this is the organization owning this. And I feel like standards that think about things and apply things from that perspective, I think are very helpful. Something else I found very useful, which is taking a model that's completely outside of like the kind of AI world, is actually thinking about what it means for, the types of organizations and the types of bodies that work on bringing in like lived experience experts, or what thing that they call like kind of lived experts, into kind of actually consulting and giving advice for the design of products. That's something that I found to be especially useful for thinking of like thinking about what it means to actually have much more inclusive and multi-stakeholder approaches to understanding the risks and actually usability from different perspectives. With one project, for example, we worked with an organization that helped us to connect to kind of, wheelchair users to give advice on a product that was being used by a transport authority to help wheelchair users through kind of, AI technology, and actually having them sit directly with the developers and actually talk through how they would use this in their own language, like actually just ended up creating a completely different approach to how the product was being developed. But actually, to listen to that conversation, you wouldn't think this is an AI conversation at all. But actually, yeah, so I think, and that's not something I think is seen enough, but actually it's an approach that I think has been developed to think about more kind of tangible design choices that people face in their world, like building designs and things like this. But I think that is equally applicable to AI too.
Iana.
Yeah, Chanell, I really love that example, and it reminds me of some projects that I've worked on in the past with kind of social media platforms and kind of more in the Web 2.0 space. And I just keep coming back to how much I feel like we've already built out, in terms of kind of structures to continue these conversations and build them out, and even, on the regulatory level, but that's separate. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it, is really gathering those perspectives and building also trust among those stakeholders, where I would understand if, initially maybe trust is missing between groups who are being, impacted by AI as it currently stands now, and the companies who are really driving that forward. Also partially because of, what those companies might be choosing to communicate and lead with, in their work with the media and work with stakeholders. I think we've also mentioned a few times already public trust, which it's definitely something I keep coming back to as well, just in my thoughts and day-to-day work. I wonder how much it's possible to decouple, and how helpful this is to decouple what exactly the public finds to be scary about AI that leads to this lack of trust, versus what is kind of distrust in the government to really regulate in a meaningful way that will protect them from maybe the fast evolving technologies. Because I do feel like those are maybe two separate but related questions. And so I think, again, though, it comes back to when we're talking about communications specificity and really going into detail, especially for non-technical audiences, of not just very process oriented, what maybe certain metrics, are being analyzed or something of that nature, but really looking at assurance as a means to an end, and really answering the question of what is that end, and making that salient, in the day-to-day, especially, when I think about in my work, how are we actually placing, let's say, organizations that are doing important work, whether it's in the AI space or others, in front of the public. I mean, that's mostly through PR and engaging with, the public where they are, so whatever they're reading. And that's often exactly making these questions salient in the context of whatever is happening in the moment, so that it can reach who they want to reach.
Thanks, Iana. Uthman.
Yeah, something that stood out from our conversation was just acknowledging that whilst people like myself might be deep experts in AI and responsible AI and AI governance, probably thinking about like fairness metrics or thresholds or regulatory requirements or even commercial value. For lots of people that aren't AI experts, they get a lot of their knowledge from just things like podcasts, right? So, which is actually great in a lot of ways, because they get very breadth of knowledge is great, they're interested. But if you speak to the average person often about AI ethics, they'll be thinking about some ex machina scenario, about some AI sentient AGI, artificial superintelligence stuff. And if you watch a lot of these big podcasts, there's no mistake why, because often self-proclaimed experts will go on them to talk about these issues. And some of them might be deeply technical, but they're not moral philosophers. So a lot of the stuff they say about sentient AI, an actual PhD moral philosopher would say, look, I mean, this is pretty rudimentary stuff, right? So when you're speaking to people about ethics of AI or even AI assurance, AI governance, you really need to understand first, like, what is their understanding of AI as a technology and how it's being used? Because they might be thinking about robotics or frontier stuff. And even now with ChatGPT, it's helped because they think of everyday uses. But the other thing as well what I found in my career is that these topics can also get super depressing when you talk about online harms and like safety related stuff and child abuse with AI and all that type of thing. So certain things that we always try to do is try to make it as non-threatening as possible, so at least you can bring people to the conversation more. So we always used to joke, right, like early in my career, that we talked about ethics being like the elephant in the room. And then we literally had media campaigns. We had giant inflatable elephants in the office. We did stuff like that, which people found really funny. It was kind of inspired by that show, BoJack Horseman, the one with the horse where he has depression and stuff, which is what we were thinking, okay, like there's a reason people like this show because it's very comedic and it's very surreal. But we found things like that were great to get senior executives and people to talk about this a lot more in a more open way.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so we have a few questions left. Want to get a sense from each of you about what was your most meaningful overall takeaway? Was there one thing that really struck you as just really impactful and meaningful for you? Aditi?
I think the most meaningful thing that came out of that day, but also ever since, like everyone else was saying, they've been thinking about it, is that's how much of an impact it made. I think everyone went away with like, wow, this was something we didn't expect. I think it was just the diversity of perspective in the room. But for me, the main thing I think is how much more willing people are now, regardless of, kind of to Uthman's point though, maybe for better or for worse, but regardless of their backgrounds, they really do want to have a say in what happens next with AI. And I think that's where the AI assurance piece becomes really critical. And that's a great thing because I think previously we've seen opinions, but there's been a lot of reticence that goes with the opinion. Maybe I shouldn't say it, maybe I shouldn't be bothered. Now everyone knows that they should actually get involved, and that's how it should be. And the other thing that was particularly meaningful was even though we all had different backgrounds, say private sector, public sector, civil society, not-for-profits, whatever it might be, we actually were agreeing with each other a lot more. I know this sounds strange, but oftentimes when I've been in these positions in the past, everyone has a position and they're like, okay, this is a private sector thing, this is a public sector thing. That wasn't really the case on that day, which I saw as very encouraging because I think then we can just have the conversation. And then the third thing I would say is surprisingly, it sort of felt like this time around with AI, we've had previous sort of online safety privacy discussions and those have been difficult. But I think everyone now at this stage, we have a starting point. So we also very much felt like we knew what to look for, or we know how to look round the corner for what isn't, we know it's coming, it isn't here yet. We can kind of already sort of prepare for that. I think previously we sort of had to wait for the thing to happen, even though we knew it would happen, to then be able to respond meaningfully. I think this time around, we're saying we're not waiting. We're just, taking matters into our own hands, which is a great thing. So I think that was particularly meaningful.
Thanks. Annabel?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that always I love about any kind of AI community event, and this one, and especially when it's kind of multi-sector and a mixed audience like this one, is just how much positive energy there is in the room and how hopeful you can go out. Because often working in this area, and often if you're, obviously I do think we've made good progress and that there is a growing understanding and all that stuff. But at the same time, it can be quite hard work in some other communities, and it can be quite, it can feel quite dystopian or disappointing at times. And actually, whenever you get into a room full of people who are working on this, the energy of passionate, purposeful people who are really committed to this, who really want to do a good job, I just think is really uplifting and inspiring, and it's a great community. And I think it really kind of refreshes and rejuvenates you for the next step ahead. So that was my takeaway.
Thank you. Chanell?
Yeah, I'm the same. And I think, yeah, that aspect of the community, I think, is so important. And especially because, I mean, it's a very challenging job anyway. And, we all know that and have spoken to that. But then I think there's an additional challenge that comes when you're a tiny minority voice in organizations where, the whole training and the ethos of organizations, especially businesses, but even you see this in non-for-profit, is not necessarily geared to the actions that aren't, and the type of kind of, risk-based thinking that underpins a lot of this work. And I think it's very useful and very, I'd say probably quite essential to be able to engage in communities and have those types of very honest and frank discussions of challenges as well, like that was able to be facilitated in the space. Because yeah, it's a good counter to that kind of the isolation that can come when you're the minority voice, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Iana.
Yeah, I think echoing a lot of what was said, I think that there's just such a desire to engage authentically. And people really, I think it was you, Aditi, who said it, people really almost take off their hats a little bit in terms of their kind of official position. I think also the types of people in the room helped, and also, of course, that it was Chatham House rule definitely didn't hurt, I would say. But I think also I saw live the benefits of something that's often criticized, and I understand where the critique comes from, which is the revolving door, I think, between regulator and industry. But I really saw the plus side of it, actually, because we had people at our table, or at my table, who had previously been in a regulator role, and then now they were in another, type of role that was outside of regulatory. And you see how that doesn't leave them, that perspective doesn't leave them. And it's not just, to the benefit of the companies that they work with now, but it's really a learning that they take with them. And so I think that was something that I really just saw live in our conversations.
Yeah, super interesting. Uthman.
The main thing for me was that everyone's trying to figure this out, right? And from different organizations, different priorities, and everyone needs to basically keep sharing what's working well and what isn't, because you might have made maybe out of the 100 things you wanted to achieve in a year, maybe you only succeed with 5. That 5 might completely change someone else's journey in responsible AI, another company, and maybe they've done a couple of things that would really help you. And if everyone's doing this together or keep sharing things that are working well, the faster we can all progress on this. And I think everyone has a vested interest in doing this well, whether you're like a product manager or a technical data scientist who's considering the frontier risks of AI and opportunities, compared to a lawyer or just a governance professional. We need to find something that works for everyone, like public and private sector. We need an approach that's just standardized and just easy to do, as frictionless as possible.
I'm also curious, was there anything that was particularly surprising as you were going through the day, either the panel or the presentation at the beginning, in the breakout sessions? What was most surprising to you? Aditi?
I think for me, what was particularly surprising was at points during the day, I was like, I'm pretty sure I had this exact conversation in either 2018 or 2019. So in some respects, I think I was very much taken back to the initial online safety sort of discussions we were having about safety, right? And it's funny because we're still, I mean, it's technically the same thing, right? We're still worried about online safety, but just from, okay, what does this mean in an AI context? But I think the other thing was particularly surprising was those problems have potentially gotten worse, and we still sort of don't know how we should kind of address these. So there's obviously a very big what now question mark, discussion there. Particularly, I think a subset of that same thing was also the child safety aspect, particularly because of AI. And then what are the guardrails there? What are what kinds of other mechanisms can we actually have this time around, considering, you can go and do anything with ChatGPT or whatever, just keeping it really simplistic. I think that was something that came up. And in that context, particularly with child safety, I think things like video games, what happens there? That's a whole industry where, we still need to figure stuff out. For me, those were the types of conversations I was like, I'm pretty sure I've discussed this before, deja vu. And then you come back to it and then you're like, oh, okay, we're in 2025. So it's fun, not fun in terms of, oh my God, I can't believe we still haven't figured this out yet. But it just means there's a lot more work to be done. But yeah, that was a surprise.
Yes. Annabel.
I think for me it was and it shouldn't have been a surprise, but maybe it's a reminder, is how global the conversation is in London sometimes. It's easy to think of the UK as just being this little island that's off on its own, and we're not part of the what's happening in the US, and we're no longer part of what's happening in the European Union. But actually, just by virtue of London being such a global city, you end up convening quite a global conversation. I used to find this in my old life in financial services. So we had a huge range just round our table, and certainly in the room, and it's maybe an area where the UK can help be partly help do some of that convening about how we try and navigate this together. Obviously, there's going to be twin speed, not even twin speed, 5 speed approaches. Who knows how many? But we do need to find some sort of center of gravity, and perhaps that's where we can help.
Chanell.
Yeah, I think I suppose it's similar to Aditi's point, but I'm actually thinking about this in more in terms of that positive. But for me, like something I was quite encouraged by was actually thinking about how much that experience and actually the type of conversations we're having at this stage in AI development, in you know, by companies or AI product rollouts, yeah, how incredible that was in comparison to what was happening in, you know, the online safety world, let's say 5 years ago, where actually, you know, at most you might have forums like, for example, the Global Internet Forum for Counterterrorism, where there can be some form of honest exchange between certain companies, like a few companies, about a challenge in a very particular area, but typically everything was quite secret. If you were working on this, sometimes you weren't actually even authorized to be able to speak about it externally, weren't able to talk to our families about problems, and, you know, even things like this. And actually, in this space where we have so many people from so many different types of companies sitting with policymakers that are also talking about what they're working on and what they're thinking about and what they're planning for, like, I think that level of transparency just wasn't there, like, you know, years ago in online safety. And that gives me a lot of encouragement with what can happen after that, I think.
Thank you. Iana.
Yeah, I agree with everything that has been said thus far. And I think on that note, you know, a lot of what we do at Trilligent is working with kind of smaller tech companies, so more startups or smaller organizations. And I think what I've seen really kind of building on your point, Chanell, is that I can't speak necessarily to some of the Web 2.0 kind of developments from years past, but I definitely see, even just in the past couple of years, how much more open I think this space has become to organizations of different sizes, especially when we're talking about, again, policy, just because that's my background, I think about it all the time. So things like public consultations, things like awareness among, I think, especially startups. I think a lot about that, especially now that it feels like every startup is an AI startup. And I feel like there is more of a space for startups to take part in these conversations than maybe there has been in the past. And I'm really encouraged by that. And I hope that there's even more of things, Annabel. Yeah, because they have such an important role to play. And I think it's one thing to talk about AI assurance and AI regulation for a very large organization that has, I think it was Uthman, I believe that you made that point earlier, that has the resources for, you know, AI specific legal counsel. And it's something completely different for, you know, a group of like 3 random people putting together a startup in their basement.
Thanks. Uthman.
I think there are 2 things that surprised me. One was the negative one, where you had a look at some statistics of like AI adoption across different countries, including the UK, and it wasn't good enough, to be honest, compared to where we think it should be. So we looked at what is the reason for that? Why are we struggling with adoption in the country, given that we have like a lot of, particularly in academia, we have a lot of talent here. So why is that not converting into significant AI adoption? And the thing that was really positive actually was that we were still discussing the frontier side of responsible AI. We had presentations from DCIT on AI agents, from AI Security Institute, and it's really great research actually, or research themes that they were looking at. And historically, this wouldn't have been something that we'd be seeing a lot of from the public sector, right? Pushing these things, some on the frontier side. And the fact that we're able to hire people from ex-DeepMind into these sorts of research institutes is just not something that used to happen. So to be honest, I hope that these institutes keep getting the funding they need to keep attracting this level of talent.
Okay, I have one final question for everyone before we go for the day. So if you could reconvene this workshop in 2 years, what progress markers or ecosystem changes would you hope to see that would signal to you we've got meaningful momentum in AI assurance? Aditi.
Yeah, I think going back to my previous answer, if we're not discussing the same things 2 years down the line, that's a great sign. No, but on a serious note, though, I think one of the things is now when we had the discussions, like, what was it, a month ago, I'd say it was very much still an acknowledgement of the fact that, regulation is coming, but it's also very fragmented, global discussion because different regions treat things differently. I think 2 years down the line, we should probably be starting to already talk about what does an aligned sort of approach look like. And then also, I think really differentiating between Gen AI, agentic AI, whatever else would have popped up by then, and then being specific about what it is we're discussing. Because I think, not that I think it was a waste of time at all. It was very useful to sort of have these discussions when we were discussing about, okay, what aspect of AI is this? But I think 2 years down the line, we would really want to be in a place where we're being very specific about what we're talking about. So I think those are maybe good enough progress markers at a very basic level. But yeah, I'd say that.
Annabel.
Yeah, some clarity and some consensus, I guess, on and maybe, maybe we're no longer talking about what it is and why we should have it, and we're more talking about what's working and what isn't working and how we improve it. That would be that would be good sign of progress.
Yes. Chanell, how about you?
Yeah, it might be quite ambitious for 2 years, but I think that for me, like something that would feel like significant progress is actually if you're convening a discussion like that, like anybody in the company that's involved in developing AI solutions or even managing the company feels like they would want to come and participate and join in. Like it's not just something that's the remit of, people doing jobs like mine. Not that I love my job. It's not that I don't want the job, but essentially it's not that it's kind of just kind of, like all of that kind of information and engagement is held in a few roles. It's actually something that everybody in the company is behind and something that, everybody in the company wants to be more engaged with and learning more about, and feels like they have the level of knowledge and experience with what they're doing to also be able to participate and contribute to these discussions too.
Thanks. Iana.
I think besides the alignment piece, which was mentioned a few times already, the other thing that really comes to mind for me is, I would say, closing the loop between evaluation and action. So really seeing real, tangible, high profile, well-communicated examples of how assurance is directly informing product decisions and other strategies would be a big win.
Uthman.
Probably just innovation, because I think as much as technologists are innovating, that we should be doing this as well. And I think that there's something about viewing this as putting your customer first and actually looking at this more from a product lens. Because even when we started running, and I was running digital ethics as a service years ago, this is around, I can't remember what year it was now. We used to joke that it was like we wanted to be like the John Lewis of digital ethics. So you wanted people to actually want to come to you to actually get customer service. So you're actually helping people solve problems. And in terms of like the biggest failure modes we see with AI, whether it's like privacy, bias, or interpretability, I don't see why we shouldn't be using tools to automate all this so we can focus more on the frontier things. We don't know how to manage those risks as well yet. So I hope that that shift from here and now governance to the frontier will change a lot because we fixed the here and now issues.
Excellent. Okay, so unfortunately, we have come to the end of our time together. Thanks for going over a little bit with us today. Just really want to send our appreciation to the panelists for joining at such a last minute cadence here. So thanks everyone for joining in as well. Please check out alltechishuman.org. We have the summary report there from the workshop, so you can really see all of the takeaways and recommendations. And we're also going to be sending this video out to everyone who registered. So please keep an eye out for that. So thank you everyone so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.